Welcome. Welcome, everyone. Come on in. Welcome back for some of you who might be tuning in from the last session. Welcome. My name is Jamila Nuruddin, and I'm your host for this Healing Trauma with EMDR and Applied Neuroscience Summit. And this session we're about to dive into is called the preparation phase, somatic approaches to resource development and EMDR therapy. And this is with Dr. Arielle Schwartz, who is amazing. And with that, I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Dr. Schwartz in our wonderful pre-recorded session. You'll find her bio in the chat right now, and I will see you on the other side of this presentation. Enjoy.
Hello. If we haven't met before, my name is Dr. Arielle Schwartz. I am a somatic therapist, and I have been specializing in the integration of somatic therapies and EMDR therapy for over 20 years. I initially trained in EMDR therapy in 2001, and I had already received a master's degree in somatic psychology, and I was particularly curious about how do we support an embodied approach to EMDR therapy, because sometimes, at least in the way that I was initially taught in EMDR therapy, there is an emphasis on a lot of mindfulness, which is beautiful, and even mindfulness of somatic experience, but a kind of reduced emphasis on the value of movement or more kind of an embodied strategy or an embodied approach to the trauma reprocessing. And it really stood in opposition of some of the somatic trainings that I had received. So my intention for our time today during this EMDR summit, and obviously I'm coming to you by recording because I'm not available in person today, but I really wanted to bring to you these creative resources for the preparation phase of EMDR therapy. Now, if you are not familiar yet with EMDR therapy, if you're not yet trained, EMDR is an 8-phase model. And the first phase is about history taking. It's about developing more stability and stabilization. It's about developing a therapeutic rapport. And it's about understanding your client in the context of their lives, their social history, developmental history, cultural history, so that we have a kind of way of working together with that shared understanding of who they are in that context of their lives. And then in phase 2 of EMDR therapy, we are focusing on the preparation for traumatic memory reprocessing, which happens in phases 3 and 4, very much so in terms of like that deeper inner work of working with the traumatic memories. But in terms of preparedness or readiness for that, not only do we want our clients to feel kind of safe enough in their lives now, but it's really deeply valuable that they have a way of being able to sense and feel their bodies, that they are, in a sense, embodied in the process so that they can report back to you and report back for ourselves. What is it that I'm sensing and feeling in relationship to this process? And if we're up here, if we're disconnected, if we've pulled away from gravity, it's harder to do so. And so we take the time at the beginning, not only to develop some basic strategies of resourcing, like being able to be at choice about when to think about the traumatic memory, a process that we call containment, where you can put that traumatic material away until it's the right time to work with it. So you're not thinking about traumatic experiences at night when you're trying to sleep or when you're trying to parent kids or go to work or any of those types of situations. So we learned that. We also want clients or ourselves to be able to have some access to a consistent sense of safety. How do we come back to that sense of ease or inner peace, in knowing that the world is going to present us with ongoing experiences of challenge? We want to be able to regulate ourselves in relationship to that. That doesn't mean that we're not going to feel sad or grieve or feel angry sometimes. Of course we are. The world presents us with plenty of opportunities to feel that normal reaction, that normal distress in response to things that are distressing. But we at least want to know that we can respond effectively to those events so that we can still take care of ourselves, take care of our loved ones, respond with a certain degree of equanimity. So that's the preparedness phase. Phase 3 in EMDR, if you're not familiar with it, is what we call the assessment phase. It's a funny name because it's not about assessing the past. It's actually about assessing a focus for the session, or what in EMDR language we refer to as the target. What are we going to work with today? What is the area of disturbance that you would like to focus on during this session? And sometimes that area of disturbance or target or focus carries across several sessions. And then phase 4, typically in the traditional EMDR protocol, is what we call desensitization and reprocessing of the traumatic memory. So at that point, we have a certain mechanism in EMDR therapy where we light up that disturbance, that traumatic memory, and we are identifying, how do you feel that in your body? What are the thoughts and beliefs that you're having? What are the emotions that you're having? What's the image related to that target or disturbance? And that is lighting up what we call a neural network, or the way that the memory gets held in the brain through these neural networks. And we'll define that a little bit as I go a little further into our process today. Now, in the arena of trauma reprocessing, we sometimes get into a lot of emphasis on the image associated with the disturbance. Now, one of the ways in which somatic therapies lends itself so beautifully to EMDR therapy is that somatics emphasizes that sometimes we don't have an image. Sometimes we don't have what we call an explicit memory, because the memory is either so early in life, it's pre-verbal, so that there's more of a felt sense in the body, but not a narrative or direct memory or image associated with it. Sometimes the experience is more that that it happened later, but that the memory reprocessing symptoms or our memory systems aren't fully intact. And so even a memory that happens later in life isn't remembered well because of the way that trauma interferes with how we store memories. Once again, having a somatic approach can be so deeply valuable. Just again, sticking with our arc of what are the 8 phases of EMDR therapy. Phase 5 is what we call installation phase, and it allows us to spend the time to catch any positive shifts that may have happened during the desensitization and reprocessing of a memory, and allow the people that we serve or ourselves to really anchor those positive changes so that we can link those positive experiences, new felt sense of self, sense of empowerment, new understanding or beliefs about self, and we can link that into our daily lives now, or even visions that we have for ourselves for the future. And then phases 6, 7, and 8 are very much about how we're shutting down a session, closing the session. There's a closure phase. We invite a body scan of releasing any lingering tension related to that session. And then phase 8 is what we refer to as reevaluation. And in fact, that often happens in the next session, where a client can come back and they can share with us what lingered between sessions, what maybe new material showed up, perhaps identifying new targets that we might want to work on. So there's your kind of brief, in a nutshell, arc of what is EMDR therapy. And as I've mentioned, our focus for today is to really hone in on how do we do some creative resourcing during phase 2. So we'll dive into that together. Now, I will have some slides. I have a relatively short slide deck for our talk today, but I will share them with you, and I'll periodically bring them back down to demonstrate some of these resources that we can do with our clients. One of the things that I love about doing resourcing with clients is that I'm usually doing them right along with them. And so it's actually nourishing for my nervous system to teach resourcing practices to others. And you'll get that sense as we go along here. I'll also be guiding you through some resourcing. You can explore this experientially for yourself, and as will I. So we'll go ahead and nurture our nervous systems together. And I'm going to pull up my slides. As I mentioned, our time together is focused on the preparation phase, or phase 2 of EMDR therapy, and we will explore somatic approaches to resource development in EMDR therapy. So take a moment, with all of that I've shared here as we've been arriving, take a moment to just allow yourself to arrive a little bit more fully. And I'm going to guide you through a little bit of a resourcing practice just to begin with, which is to identify one area of nourishment in your life. This could be a place of beauty, a supportive relationship, or any activity that brings you a sense of joy. The particular photograph I have on this slide is one that I took on one of my evening walks. And my evening walks are very often what I draw upon as my not only place of beauty, but an activity that I enjoy. And I often pair it with my love of photography. So, what is that for you? What is a thing that you can go back to again and again? Or something that really stands out in your mind that has brought you a lot of joy? Maybe it's a relationship, maybe it's your dog or cat. And one of the things that really helps us anchor a positive state is to slow down and savor it, linger there. So I'll invite you to do that as well. Once you've found something that brings you joy, enhance this good feeling, slow down around it. Perhaps even track your body and notice how your body responds to that positive state, positive imagery. How does your body give you feedback that this is a feel-good place for you? And then maybe deepen your breath. Allow yourself to breathe just a little bit more fully into any positive sensations that are present for you. See if you can allow yourself to fully receive the nourishment of this experience here and now. Good. And if you find this arriving practice, this little experiential invitation challenging, don't worry, you're not alone. This is something that kind of like any emotion that sometimes we need to build tolerance to stay with any state, whether that's building tolerance for our distress or building tolerance for a positive emotion. Sometimes we have blocking thoughts that show up, or feelings of unworthiness or shame that interfere with our ability to feel good. And if that's the case for you, I invite you to be very gentle with yourself. And sometimes even just allowing yourself to have compassion for the recognition that you tried something and that it was hard for you in itself is the positive state that we can generate right here and now. It's a little bit of softness around, ooh, that was hard to stay with a positive feeling or generate a positive feeling. So just noticing what's true for you, being gentle as we move forward. And if this was very easy for you, if you had a place of nourishment in your life that was easy to connect to, bring that with you as you move forward in the rest of this training, right? Keep tapping back into that positive state. Continue to let it grow. So what we're doing here is we're going to build some positive neuroplasticity. First of all, what is neuroplasticity? It's a recognition that we have about 86 billion neurons in the brain, each with thousands of connections to each other. And all of our memories, beliefs, and behaviors are encoded as neural networks. Now, I'll keep coming into the definition of neural networks in a moment, but before we go into that, I just want to name that your brain, everyone's brains, we are changing with every life experience. It used to be thought that we only had neuroplastic change in early childhood as young children, and now we recognize that we have the capacity for neuroplastic change all throughout our lifespan. So as I mentioned, what are neural networks? A neural network is really a group of interconnected neurons in the brain that work together, and they form the basis for all learning. Every time we do a new behavior, we create a new neural circuit. And that the more that we repeat that behavior, the more frequently we repeat it, the more that we're going to myelinate that nerve pathway, which allows the signals to move more quickly and smoothly. And all of our memories are patterns of neural networks. So I'm going to just pause here for a second. And for two reasons. One is that I just want to define the word myelination or myelinate. Myelin is a fatty sheath of glial cells that surround the neurons, and that the more frequently we engage a neuronal pathway, the more of that fatty sheath we're going to layer on top of it, which that basically allows the signal of that neuron to travel more quickly. And so there's other factors that also contribute to myelin in the brain. Having enough fatty acids in your diet, being able to have access to enough omega-3s and 6s and those kinds of fatty acids are particularly good for growing glial cells and Schwann cells, which are the formation of that myelin sheath that goes over nerves. And it actually sometimes is, I like to think of it as very much like a smooth coating. Now, here's some other examples of what it means to myelinate a pathway, or that ease of repetition. If you can remember back to the first time that you were learning to tie a shoe, right? Or if you've ever taught a child to tie a shoe, it's awkward. You make the loop, it doesn't go right, it falls apart, right? How many times have we had that experience? The shoe comes untied again and again. And then the more that you've practiced it, at some point it just becomes muscle memory and easy to tie the shoe. Same thing with riding a bike, right? At first that balance is off. Now these are procedural memories. These are memories that are body-based. We have a felt experience of the balance it requires to ride a bike and the movement that propels that bike through space that helps us cultivate that balance. And initially it's awkward and we fall a lot and we scrape our knee or whatever else happens. And then eventually we get skilled and it just becomes something we can do while we're whistling a tune or whatever else you do when you ride a bike, right? You're looking around enjoying the scenery. And I'll share one more example, which is learning a new piece of music. It's if you are a musician, the first time that you might sit down, I'll use piano playing as an example. The first time it might be really studying the music, plunking out each note, really getting a sense of how the whole piece sounds. And then the more that you practice it, the smoother it gets, the faster it is. Eventually, you might not even need to look at the music anymore. You've memorized the piece, and there's that quality of muscle memory and that ease of movement through your hands and that creation of the music. And what's also really lovely about any of these, whether it's being a dancer, whether it's being a musician, is that once we get comfortable in it, then in a sense we get creative, right? It gives more space for us to be able to infuse that experience with emotion, with a depth of presence, right? Because we're no longer having to figure it out. And so now we can move into the experience with more of ourselves. So if we're trying to myelinate a capacity to feel positive emotions, and if you or someone that you're working with struggles with accessing that positive state, then it's kind of like the first time we're tying the shoe, and it may take quite a few repetitions and willingness to stay with the discomfort until we can be with or just find that just right resource that allows someone to access that positive feeling. For example, I often keep in my office items of nature, right? That experience of just being able to hold something, have that tactile experience, like a pine cone, like a cool rock that you might find, right? I have lots of them here, so that you can maybe find something that feels like that access point to a positive state through the tactile experience of something that you might touch. or the experience of being able to have a pillow or a fuzzy blanket that's nearby, that you can really feel the softness and have that felt experience. Sometimes it's more easy to access a positive state by looking at an item of beauty. So it's one of the reasons that I'm often keeping flowers or art, or finding something that is that reminder that I'm, in a place that really holds me with beauty. Now, when we're living in a world where there's so many cues of threat that we are facing day to day, those threats can dominate our awareness, whether it's in your social media or what you see on the news, what's happening in various countries around the world, war and killing and so forth, and or recent shootings that may have happened in the United States, right? There's a lot that we get exposed to on a day-to-day basis, and then the next thing you know, that's seems to be what we're thinking about, or we keep looking at the news. Now, what are we myelinating? What are we strengthening? Those fear-based states, those threat-based states. And so it doesn't mean that we're going to ignore the distress when we're building a resource state. What we're doing is we're building a broader capacity for our awareness to hold a sense of resource, so that when we attend to the distress, we can do so with wisdom, with softness, with ease. I often describe this as this ability to hold the both and, so that we can sense the distress and we can sense the beauty or the capacity that's available for us now. All right, I'm going to go back into a few slides and we'll see where this takes us from here. So when we look at traumatic memories, there's some research that suggests that traumatic memories are an impaired encoding of neural networks. So what does that mean? An impaired encoding of a neural network. It means that that neural network is not well integrated with the positive experiences of our lives. So it's limited in its ability to accommodate new information. And it can impair our clients or our own ability to be what we call emotionally flexible and cognitively constructive when thinking about difficult life events. So if you think about this, when we get this kind of idea here that the traumatic memory is not integrated with other positive experiences, it's limited in its ability to accommodate new information, and it impairs emotional flexibility and cognitive creativity, or being cognitively constructive. So what happens then is that when something activates or triggers the memory of the traumatic event, we are dropping right into this felt experience of ourselves in the world that feels pretty isolated. It takes us into what we often think of as this downward spiral. So I'm going to take this down for just a moment again, and we'll come back. But the downward spiral is kind of built on an understanding that our memories have a certain state-dependent quality to them. You may have learned this once, and if you ever took a psychology graduate course, state-dependent memory is basically that when we are feeling a certain way, when we're in a certain mental state or arousal state in the body, that experience is linked to other times that we felt that way, and we're more likely to remember other times that we felt just that way. So, for example, if you studied for a test, kind of classic psychology example here, if you studied for a test while drinking coffee or caffeine, then it's wise to tape the test when you've had your coffee or caffeine, because the experience of the studying and that material kind of gets linked into that maybe caffeinated or that certain arousal state in mind and body, are more likely to trigger those the memory of that data. Yeah. So if you are thinking about this in relationship to trauma, if you've experienced some kind of disturbing life event that evoked a very high arousal state of fear, then you might, in that, when that trauma gets reactivated, you have some kind of re-experiencing symptoms, some disturbance, then that fear state is going to link to other times that you felt afraid. And those memory networks are connected through the emotion. Likewise, if you had a traumatic experience where you felt despair or helplessness or powerlessness, there's nothing that I can do to change my circumstances. And then something in your current life evokes that same quality, that same flavor, then you're inside of that memory neural network of all of the times when you may have felt helpless, powerless to change your circumstances, right? So those memory networks link up. But what they're not good at, what those memories maybe aren't so great at, is helping us create a state change, helping us have that emotional flexibility to also remember times in which I felt confident, powerful, capable, or safe, right? And so when we are building the resource states, we also want to be able to tap into the memories of times when you have felt safe, confident, capable, loved, right? Connected, peaceful, at ease, nourished, whatever those key words are for you or for someone that you're working with. And that when we access that positive state, we want to pause there, savor it, linger, and let it grow so that we have increased facility of being able to access that positive state. And eventually we will learn how to hold that both and, so that I can access this experience of myself as safe enough now and connected now, so that I can turn towards my suffering without being swallowed by it, without feeling like the suffering is all that there is, or convincing me that I'm completely powerless. There may have been a time when I was powerless, but I can access what I do have some power or some control of in my life. And I can feel that sense of agency as I turn towards the memory of a time when I had no agency. Perhaps the most common question that I get when I teach this material, and one of you is probably thinking it, is, but what if I don't have that agency now? What if the trauma is still ongoing? What if I'm living with chronic, houselessness or poverty, or the systemic racism that's happening in our world, or I'm living in a war zone, or I'm living as a refugee, right? These kinds of very real situations that we are facing. And what's delicate about it is that even in most of the hardest situations, right, working with individuals who are having to go to school in bomb shelters because of what's happening in Ukraine, or what's happening in the Gaza Strip, or in Israel, or wherever these places in the world right now that are experiencing a lot of strife, even in those places, is there a source of connection? Can you sense the relative safety of this moment, right? So that we still want to have enough of an anchor of safe enough, because our bodies are not going to unwind the trauma until there's an anchor of safe enough here and now. These are tricky situations, tricky examples. And most of the time, if you're working in as a coach or as a therapist in more of a private practice setting, we have that relative safety set aside in a session time. Or if you are someone that goes to yoga as a source of safety, you have the relative safety of that practice time. Right. For me, when I go on my sunset walks, I have the relative safety of that activity and and just the temporal nature of it, even though there's a whole lot that we can't predict in our lives. Okay. Back into our slides. So neuroplasticity can work in two directions. It can strengthen us in the direction of positive states, but it can also become a stress-induced neuroplasticity in which we are reinforcing negative thinking patterns, negative emotional states, negative felt sense in the body. And this is just related to what we refer to as Hebb's law, which simply states that whatever fires together wires together. And whatever you are repeatedly thinking, feeling, or sensing is going to build new or strengthen existing patterns of neural connections in the brain. So we think of PTSD as a form of stress-induced neuroplasticity. Why is that? Because one of the most common symptoms of PTSD is re-experiencing symptoms, in which the individual is re-experiencing some kind of disturbing element of the memory, whether that's an emotion, whether that's a felt experience in the body, whether that's an image that's coming back in the form of a nightmare in a dream, whether that's the repeated negative belief about self that you just keep, I'm hopeless. What's wrong with me? I'm such a failure. I'm worthless. Nobody's ever going to love me. And the more that we are repeating those negative beliefs, we're actually wiring them in. And so it is we are going to work from a cognitive standpoint and from a body-based standpoint to create positive change, to create a new experience where we can actually enhance the, kind of drive our growth in the wanted direction. So let's take a look at what that is. That's what we call positive neuroplasticity, in which we are purposefully changing our neural networks through directed effort. Positive neuroplasticity refers to how we shape our growth in a wanted direction. And positive neuroplastic change requires that we are consciously inhibiting old responses while we are intentionally repeating new, more adaptive responses. So this image that I have on this slide, I took on a hike that I was taking, and I loved it. Not only is the idea that the trail is blocked off so we can let that part of the trail rehabilitate, but I love this healing in process. And if some way we could just put those signs up in our own minds sometimes, right? Stay on the trail, stay on the wanted pathway here of your thoughts, and don't go down into those corners of the negative spirals, those downward spirals. So when we're inhibiting, I'll take down my slide for a second so you can see me, but when we're inhibiting the kind of unwanted response, we might catch those negative beliefs and just really pause and say, is what I'm saying to myself helpful right now? When we're inhibiting this kind of repetition of that worst case scenario thinking, when we're inhibiting the tendency just to slump into that state of helplessness. And sometimes emotions are really releasing and they have a kind of healing quality. And sometimes our emotions feel like they just take us in this, kind of, whirlpool of recycling negative state. And so sometimes we need to differentiate, is the emotion I'm feeling right now pulling me towards growth, helping me heal, releasing something? Is it combined in a quality of healing, or is it actually just recycling the pain and leaving me kind of stuck in that whirlpool? And same thing with the somatic experience, right? Like ultimately, we do want to turn toward the pain. We want to relate to the contraction that we might be experiencing in the body or the tension. But if we just go toward the pain and the contraction, it becomes all that we sense and feel. So even from a movement perspective, we can come in and out of a contracted state and also being able to move towards a sensation of joy or pleasure, right? So that we can actually feel a little bit of the both and, even if there is somatic distress. That is one of the core ways that we can work with chronic pain, for example, is that chronic pain becomes this loop in which the mind just keeps orienting towards the distress and has a harder time moving towards states of ease or joy or pleasure. A few more kind of pieces of the baseline information, and then I'll go into a few practices. So I mentioned this already, there's a slide to accompany it, that we will not release the effects of trauma until we feel safe enough now. So in the preparation phase of EMDR therapy, we are doing what we refer to as resource development installation. Resources might include memories of feeling loved by others, feeling comforted or protected, feeling competent or successful, or times in which you felt safe, peaceful, and relaxed. And your resource might be discovered through your breath or movement or embodied states that help you to feel strong and empowered. Any positive state helps to release the natural feel-good chemicals by increasing dopamine and oxytocin and serotonin and endorphins. And through repeated practice, you learn to strengthen the neural networks associated with those positive sensations and emotions and cognitions. And this helps then prepare you for trauma reprocessing. Remember before, I'll take this down for just a second, but earlier when I was talking about the neural networks that are cut off or not able to functionally connect to resource states, it's like I like to think of them as this, they're kind of gone into quarantine or exile, right? And they're not able to go outside and see the beauty of the garden and the sun and all that's out there. And so when we are building the positive resource states, we really want to ultimately know that we're building these bridges so that we can start to move more fluidly between those states of contraction or distress into the realization that I can also touch the ease, the pleasure, the okayness that serves as that resource, so that we're now being able to bridge between the traumatic memory and the positive state. And when we look at the function of reprocessing a memory from the perspective of EMDR therapy, in phase 4, we want these resources so that when we open up the disturbance of the distressing memory, we're basically better able to link those positive states that we've built and cultivated into the traumatic memory. All righty, back into our screen share. So there's lots of research out there that talks about what we call the negativity bias, that this is the human tendency to focus on what's wrong and the negative. And our capacity to focus on the positive is something that needs to be developed. In order to counteract our negativity bias, we need to actively look for evidence of positivity and goodness in our lives. Rick Hanson's book, Hardwiring Happiness, is a fantastic resource in this regard. He offers this skill within that hardwiring happiness approach, which is that we can use this acronym HEAL as a way to combat the negativity bias. And the first part of the HEAL acronym is H, have a positive experience, which means that if you don't have one in your memory network, go cultivate one, go create one, right? Like really build that reservoir of positive states by creating them. And then once we have access to that positive experience, enrich it, which means that we want to get to know all the sensory details of it, really pay attention, focus in on what about that brings you joy, brings you gratitude, appreciation, helps you feel loved, whatever it is. And so we really get to know it, and then we absorb it. And absorbing it simply takes time. We, can react to a threat or a sign of danger within a fraction of a second, but it takes between 20 and 30 seconds for our nervous systems to absorb a positive state. So we take as much time as we need to really grow that positive state. And then, as I've already been naming, then we want to link the positive material with the negative state, right? So that we are going to come back, we're going to return to that area of distress, the disturbing memory, the tension that we're feeling, that contraction, and we're going to really link these two states together. Neuromodulation is a kind of fancy phrase that if you break it down, it simply means nervous system, neuromodulation, change, so nervous system change. And when we look at some of the tools to facilitate nervous system change, I'm going to draw some on my background with vagal toning and natural vagus nerve stimulation, because it's a very direct way to cultivate a felt experience in the here and now of a positive state. And natural vagus nerve stimulation is different than hacking your nervous system. This is my personal opinion on it. Some people like that biohacking approach out there. For me, I think hacking has an aggressive tone to it. So it's why I stay away from that word. I emphasize more that we are gently awakening the ventral vagal circuit. We are cultivating a positive state through that gentleness, and that most of the time, and I'll try and, do my best via recording here to emphasize this with you, but most of the time we really want to recognize the importance of social connection in this process, because our ventral vagal circuit, from the perspective of polyvagal theory, is the upper, more recently evolved circuit of the vagus nerve that is focused on social connection as a biological imperative. So it's much more about attachment and connection to the people around us. It's the ventral vagal circuit of the vagus nerve travels up into our eyes, into our ears, into the larynx and pharynx in the throat, around the muscles of the face and mouth, and into your heart and lungs. So it's about how we communicate to others, how we feel, and how we recognize emotions in other people through their facial expressions or voice tone, and so forth. Within neuromodulation, we are focusing on safety and choice, and we are both soothing the nervous system, meaning that it can have a calming impact, but we're also simultaneously stimulating the nervous system. So it can lift us up out of a slump. We can come out of a collapse or feeling of being kind of depressed into more of a state of connection, more alertness, more awakeness, more presence. Again, this ventral vagal circuit is one of the circuits of the vagus nerve. The vagus nerve is our 10th cranial nerve. It gets its name wandering. Vagus is Latin for wandering. And because it extends so widely throughout the body, into the larynx and pharynx in the throat, the heart and lungs, into the face, as I've mentioned, in the inner ears, but then also down through the esophageal hiatus, alongside the esophagus, down through the diaphragm, and then into stomach, into all of your digestive organs, very much through all of the intestines, and then all the way into your reproductive organs as well. And the vagus nerve serves as this bidirectional information highway, so that it's carrying information from body to brain and brain down to body. But importantly, 80% of that information is coming from the body up to the brain, helping the brain do a better job to regulate your body. So what you sense and feel, how you're breathing, how you're moving is going to directly shape how your brain does its job. And when we're disconnecting or dissociating from the body, it's harder for the brain to do an accurate job tracking and adapting to the biological needs of your body, so that you can actually work with your biology by building more sensory experience. As I mentioned before, the diaphragm or the vagus nerve travels through the diaphragm alongside the esophagus. So it's actually kind of traveling right, almost like wrapped around the esophagus, and then it's going to go into your stomach and into all of your digestive organs. Now we're looking at the back body here. And of course, the vagus nerve also travels all throughout the heart and lungs, and then up along the sides of the neck, and then into your brainstem right here. So this is not showing the front of the face and inner ear connections, but showing how the vagus nerve is going to carry all of this information from your belly brain, your enteric nervous system, your heart brain, all the way up into your brainstem. And every time we breathe, especially if we do kind of diaphragmatic breathing or belly breathing, we are facilitating a kind of massage along the vagus nerve. And that the movement of your diaphragm is also expanding and contracting the space around your heart. And these changes of the space around your lungs and heart is going to either increase or decrease the blood pressure in your heart via baroreceptors in the heart. So let me explain this for just one more moment, and then we'll do a little breathing practice together. So every time, if you're breathing correctly, every time you inhale, your diaphragm is going to drop down. And you can even mirror this with your hands with me for a moment. So that as you inhale, your diaphragm is going to go kind of downward or outward, and it's going to create more space for your lungs. Now, when you create more space around your heart and lungs, you're increasing the amount of volume for your heart. As your heart expands into that space, there is more room for the blood to pass through the heart. There's actually a greater volume of the heart for that blood to pass through, which begins to slow down the heart rate, right? The more space, the slower things go. Imagine a river that suddenly widens. That river is going to slow down. When that river comes back into the narrows, you're going to get more rapids. It's going to move, the same amount of water is going to move faster through a smaller range of space. So now we've taken that deep diaphragmatic inhalation, the hands go down, there's more space for your heart, the blood's going to slow down, and the baroreceptors, the blood pressure receptors in the heart, send a signal up to your brainstem that says, speed things up. We need to ensure that the heart can continue to get the blood to the brain. So ideally, we create more space, more volume for the heart. The heart is going to get a signal back down from the brain that says, speed it up a little bit. And so that's why our inhalations actually will stimulate a little bit of that mobilization of heartbeat, or the sympathetic nervous system kicks in on your inhalation pattern. We need a little bit more heartbeat to keep the blood moving through that broader space. On your exhale pattern, diaphragm comes back up. It compresses around heart lungs. We get smaller space. The change in blood pressure will automatically speed things up, sending a signal to your brainstem via the baroreceptors to brainstem through the vagus nerve that's carrying that signal, heart to brain, that says, oh, we just went into the narrows, slow things down to keep us regulated. And so in response to the exhale pattern, the brain sends a signal down to reapply what we call the vagal brake, which is going to slow down that sympathetic activation of heartbeat and slow your heartbeat back down. All right, I have some of this on a slide for you, and we're going to do a little breath practice together. We also know that stressful and traumatic situations can cause shallow breathing, holding of the breath, a tightening in the chest, overbreathing, and feelings of panic. Breath is the fastest way to regulate the autonomic nervous system, or the two branches of our sympathetic and parasympathetic systems. And as I've mentioned, because of this paradoxical response, each inhale gently stimulates your sympathetic nervous system, and every exhale gently stimulates the parasympathetic nervous system. This is primarily true if you're breathing diaphragmatically, meaning that your diaphragm is moving with your breath, and so you're actually emphasizing a broader range of space around heart and lungs. And in the research out there about the breath, there is a particular kind of researched breath here called resonance frequency breathing, which basically means that we're breathing the same rate for your inhale and exhale. About a 5 or a 5.5 count inhale and a 5.5 second exhale is what's recommended within the research resonance frequency breathing pattern. And you can also look back at ancient yogic texts, and there is a yogic breath called Samavriti In the sense, the yogis knew this all along. Samavriti is sama, same, vritti, movement, vritti. And the movement is not only the movement of the breath, the movement of, but it's also the movement of the mind. And there was this understanding in the yogic text that as we slow down and regulate the breath, the mind correspondingly slows down as well. And so we can actually work with mind through breath. So let's do just, I don't know, a minute or so of this breathing practice together and just see what you notice. So I'll invite you to bring your hands to your diaphragm, and you can again mirror it with your hands if you'd like, or just sensing and feeling that movement of the diaphragm forward and down and back and in. And I'll invite a count of the breath. I'll offer my count to start, and then I'll let that go, and I'll let you find about 5 or so breaths on your own. So beginning to inhale for 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Exhale 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Finding your own count, same inhale, same exhale. Emphasizing the diaphragmatic movement. Diaphragm moves down and out on the inhale pattern. And up and back on the exhale. Good. About one more breath, your own timing. And then pausing the breath for a moment and just see what you notice. Hopefully, this brings in a little bit of a sense of calm or ease. And it doesn't always, right? If we were live, one of you would probably be asking me one of the most common questions I get about breath, which is, what if focusing on my breath triggers me? What if it brings up a feeling of not being safe? And that happens sometimes. Does that mean that we don't ever want to try and work on breath as a resource? Actually, no. We still want to perhaps tune into maybe down the road, breath can be something that we return to. But initially, breath might be overcoupled, awareness of breath might be overcoupled with trauma states, right? So that sensing your breath or hearing the sound of your breath might be related to a time in which you were so acutely aware of breath during something that felt traumatic. And we can learn how to uncouple those associations so that eventually breath can feel like a resource for you now, even though it once felt scary. And Samavriti is just one of honestly about 15 or 20 or more different really effective breath practices that are out there. But knowing that this is a basic and that it's a really good go-to is a good place to start. And then also you can work with a box breathing where you add a retention and a hold, or you can emphasize the exhalation as longer than the inhalation as a way to facilitate a more calming response. And there's so much more. You can look into Wim Hof breathing and Kapalabhati breath work and practices that really bring a lot of a sense of aliveness. And for me, with a background as a yoga teacher, I love teaching breath practices. I've been teaching pranayama for about 25 years, and it's very near and dear to me, the whole range of practices that are out there for us. For our purposes here, we're going to go back into our slides and talk about some additional strategies for resource development. One of these is self-applied touch, and we're going to talk about self-havening touch. So self-havening is a psychosensory intervention, meaning that we're going to anchor some psychological tools while we're adding the sensory input of touch. Now, just like the breath, which is a resource for some people and feels triggering for others, it's the same thing with touch. For some people, touch feels really easily accessible and feels like a nurturing way to take care of yourself. And for others, placing your hands on your own body, here we're going to work with upper arms and face, can feel uncomfortable, or it can feel maybe it brings up experiences of disgust, or experiences of not liking the body that I'm in for a variety of reasons. And so knowing that, you're going to fine tune what is the resource for you, what is the resource for other people if you're a practitioner. And as a psychosensory intervention, there's a lot of research out there about the application of touch and how it reduces heart rate and blood pressure, and it lowers norepinephrine and cortisol, our stress hormones. It increases our feel-good chemicals, oxytocin and positive emotions, and GABA and serotonin. And then we have the touch itself, which I'm going to teach you here. I'm going to show you the slide with it. We're going to work with a psychosensory component of this, which is to visualize some kind of place of safety, that place of nourishment. So you might go back to the one that we started with today, that arriving practice of imagining a person, a place, a pet, something that's a source of nourishment. If it's a place, you embellish that place with your senses. Imagine you're at the ocean, the sound of the waves, the feel of the sand below your feet, the smell of the salt air. So whatever your place is, really get in touch with it, embellish it. Remember, enhance it with all of those sensory details. And then we're going to add the touch. We'll begin with palms. I'm going to guide you through it in a moment. I'll take the slide down. We'll start with palms. We're going to go to forehead, hairline, cheeks, and then upper arms. So, and my dear friend Kate Truitt, this image comes from her book. I highly recommend it. Healing is in your hands. Certainly worth having in your trauma treatment toolbox. So, as promised, I'm going to guide you through this. So to start, pulling forward that imagery, letting that positive state grow. If it's hard to work with imagery, pull forth something in the here and now that helps you feel cared for. Maybe it's the sound of my voice, that social connection. Maybe it's holding an item from nature. It's also really lovely sometimes to work with something like an essential oil, where you have like an olfactory cue for for some quality of a connection to safety and love. That one was clary sage. It's one of my personal favorites, right? So choose what helps bring you into positive state and let it grow. Let that positive state grow. Let your posture reflect it. Maybe your face reflects that positive state, right? Maybe there's a lifting in your face. And if you don't feel it yet, you might in a moment. And then just allowing yourself to find a little bit of palm to palm connection. And in this one, it's different than a rapid rubbing of the hands. We're just going to allow the fingertips to grace each palm, and then palm to palm. You can move nice and slow. Really feel that connection between your hands. Waking up the fibers in the palms of your hand. The skin areas that we're touching are very replete with C-tactile fibers, and you can look this up, but they have a lot of very positive neurotransmitter and positive emotion release connections. So connecting to your hands and then bringing your hands to your forehead and just allowing yourself to sweep from center of forehead out towards your temples. You can keep pulling to mind your image of connection, safety, beauty. or that anchor, that sensory anchor in the here and now to that positive state. Maybe you move up closer to your hairline, your scalp a little bit here. Now, it's okay. You can mess up your hair a little bit, right? Just let it feel good. I know for me, this is my favorite part of a massage. And yay, we can give this to ourselves as well. It's letting yourself find that feel good place. Good. And then across your cheeks from the bridge of your nose outward toward your ears. Again, a feel good experience. And if you'd like, well, apparently I don't want to leave this one too quickly. I'm liking this one. Let yourself enjoy it too. And then if you'd like, going from shoulders to elbows. Now, you might go in both directions. Generally, the recommendation in the self-havening approach is to move just in this downward direction, shoulders to elbows, and it's fine to go right over your clothing, or you might want to make more contact with your skin if that's available. Doesn't matter. You are, in a sense, if you imagine petting a cat, we go directionally when we're petting the cat because they're the fibers of their fur moves in one direction. And there's a little bit of research about the fibers of the small hairs on the skin also having a directional quality. So this downward movement, hands from shoulders to elbows. And then pausing for a moment. You might also notice that we're crossing midline in this movement, right? We've got that bilateral or contralateral component that's very often present with EMDR. And then just pause. Let your hands rest. Allow yourself to notice what you feel now. How does your breath reflect any positive shift? What are the sensations you're aware of now in your body? Are there any thoughts that are reflective of what you're experiencing now? And again, if it's not feeling good, if it doesn't feel easeful or generative, you can place that in a container if you'd like. It could be something you bring to your own therapy if anything ever gets stirred up in here. And hopefully, at least one of the strategies that I'm offering here feel good to you, because that's ultimately what we're going for. We're really going for creating these positive states. Okay, I'm going to go back into our slides to share this next tool of neuromodulation. And this one is what we refer to as the tragus and conchae stimulation. It's basically this recognition that our ears have a very high degree of vagal sensory nerve endpoints here. So when we're massaging the cartilage in front of the ear, this is the tragus, and the concha, or the seashell of the ear, is the area that surrounds the ear canal. And that where the vagus nerve travels into the ear lobe itself, it's called the auricular branch of the vagus nerve, the ABVN, also known as Alderman's nerve or Arnold's nerve. And right in here, this conchae consists of 100% vagal fibers. So I'm going to take this down. We'll do this together. And some of you may use vagus nerve stimulation devices. These have been made out there. There's one that attaches, for example, to the TENS machine, which is a kind of very small kind of electrical current, non-painful, that is stimulating of the nerve endings, sensory nerve endings in the body that helps to release release pain or relieve pain. And so there's a TENS machine unit that clips onto the tragus of the ear for vagus nerve stimulation. We're going to do this ourselves without the use of a electroceutical device here. And as I mentioned, this is the tragus, and we saw it in the picture here. You can place your thumbs behind, you can take your forefingers in front, and then just allowing yourself to find a little bit of self-applied massage right here. And with any vagus nerve stimulation practice, I'm going to recommend super light, nothing forced, let it feel good. You can do both sides at the same time or one side at a time, whatever feels right for you. And then you can also use your fingertips and then moving towards that concha or seashell that surrounds the ear canal. And if you have long fingernails, you can use a Q-tip. We're not going inside the ear canal, but all around it. Although if you do clean your ears with Q-tips, it is its own form of vagus nerve stimulation. So if that's something that you're like, oh, that's always felt good for me, even though they don't recommend it, right? Don't break that Q-tip in your ear. But that is why it feels good. All right. And again, hopefully this feels good for you. And if it doesn't, you can always stop. Okay. And then when you feel complete, go ahead and let your hands rest. And just see what you notice now. Maybe an urge to take a deep breath. Yeah. All right, just a little bit more here. We go back into our slides. So sometimes what we're trying to do, and I started out our talk today with a little bit of this, is we're trying to build positive state. We're trying to build our capacity to be with more emotion, more sensation, but we're also in preparation for EMDR therapy, reprocessing of a memory or desensitization of a memory. In our phase 4 work is we also want to build tolerance for any emotion and any sensation. So whether it's grief, whether it's sadness, whether it's anger, whether it's the ability to be present to your shame without feeling overwhelmed by it, we can start to explore what kinds of supports do you or the people you serve need to stay with an emotion or sensation. Does that feeling in your body need more breath? Are there any movements that might help you be with this feeling? What happens if you press into your feet and legs? How does that change what you're sensing and feeling right now? You can try it for yourself. If you're sitting in a way that your feet aren't touching the ground, just simply bring your feet to the earth and press a little bit more into your feet and just see what you sense. How does that change your experience? And especially if there's a big emotion, right? If there's a lot of feeling, simply placing your feet on the ground, or better yet, take your shoes off, take your socks off, and go stand outside on grass, on sand at the beach, on even on something that's a little bit cold. It's very stimulating. You'll really sense and feel your feet. So just start to notice what happens as you get your legs under you, how that supports you to have more of a foundation to be with a broader range of your feelings. Maybe what shuts down that ability to be with a feeling is some kind of negative belief. I can't handle it. It's too much. There's not enough support, right? Like, what could you say to yourself now? I've got this. I can handle it now. I can be loving to myself now, even though I'm feeling this pain or this distress. So you can explore what you might say to yourself to help you be with more. Or you might imagine, is there a person, and if it's hard to find a person, maybe bring to mind a pet, or even an imagined being from a spiritual presence or a character from a movie, right? Who would be that good person for you that could help you be with this feeling? One of my people that I pull in periodically is Mr. Rogers, right? What a warm, caring, mature adult male presence, right? And if you didn't have that person in your life, you can borrow Mr. Rogers with me, right? Pull in the idea of someone who would just look at you with the most warm, caring expression on their face, the most that depth of the unconditional acceptance that all of us need. It's our birthright. What does it feel like to let someone, some presence like that, be there for you and fully hold and support you? When we're turning toward a distressing emotion, anger, sadness, despair, shame, loneliness, powerlessness, right? It's important to know that you can pace yourself. You get to be in charge of how much to feel and when to feel it. And you can take breaks from this feeling as often as necessary so that you can even address that there may be part of you that wants to turn toward that uncomfortable feeling, and that there's part of you that may be afraid, and that we can hold the both and of the part that's ready and the part that's tentative or unsure or a bit afraid, scared of an experience. And that you can build your capacity to turn towards more distress over time. I'll take this slide down and I'll share just a few little pieces before we close. One is that when we're exploring that parts work, right? So I've kind of leaned us into this idea that there might be a part that's ready to feel the distress and a part that's afraid, or a part that believes you can't handle it. I'm always curious about where did this get learned, right? This one that says, that's too much for me. I can't handle it. I don't know how to be with my distress. I don't know, that's going to just take over. Who was that true for? Whose voice is that? Because we internalize the lack of emotion tolerance from somewhere. Generally, there was some relationship in your life where, in one's life, where we got that message. We were too much for somebody. Somebody else couldn't handle our emotions. But that doesn't mean that your emotions aren't handleable or worth attending to. And then one more piece here about the pacing. In somatic psychology, we learn a practice called titration. It's something that Peter Levine and somatic experiencing speaks about a lot. And titration means that we're turning toward small amounts of the distress, allowing some of that to bubble up to the surface of our awareness, and then to find a sense of ease or completion. And so we don't have to turn towards the entire reservoir of our pain at once. That would be overwhelming for anybody, but that we can turn towards the tolerable amount of that distress and attend to that and begin to unwind and unpack that at the pace that we can handle it and tolerate it. And that in time, we know that we can turn towards our sadness or pain or despair or shame or whatever that is, and hold it more lovingly with greater kindness. I'm going to end this. I'm going to come to completion here with one final brief practice that I'm going to call the heart twist here. And it's a alternate practice to the bilateral stimulation that EMDR therapy is so known for. It's, sometimes we do the butterfly tap. It's a beautiful one. We've already done self-havening today. And this one just invites you to place your hands on your heart. Once again, I'm going to invite you to just reflect from our time together today. One moment, one little gem, one little golden nugget that you're taking away from this experience. Maybe it was the breathing or the havening or that image of your nourishing place. And let yourself grow and feel that positive state really build inside of you. And then we'll just add a little bit of bilateral to anchor that in. And this bilateral will invite you to open one hand to the side and then bring it back to your heart and open the other way. And bring it back to your heart. And allowing yourself just to follow your fingertips with your gaze. Your head can turn. And then letting your breath come into the action, inhaling or exhaling in whichever form you'd like. You can feel it out. Do you want to inhale as you expand and exhale to center? Do you want to exhale to the side and inhale to the heart? Up to you. And just 5 or so more breaths. And then when you feel complete, I'm going to invite you to place palm to palm at the center of your heart, feeling your connection to midline, maybe allowing your spine to be nice and long here. And perhaps finding some word or short phrase that anchors in this connection to your center, available for you here and now. And it's here for you anytime that you need to return to this state. Thank you so much for joining me here. Until next time.
Okay. Thank you, everyone, for joining us live for that very powerful and incredible uh, teaching from Dr. Arielle Schwartz. For those that don't know, there's going to be a much deeper dive into the somatic EMDR therapy certificate program that we have starting in February in 2024. And several teachers today from our session, Carrie Powers, Craig Paneer, Dr. Scott Lyons, and Dr. Arielle Schwartz, of course, will be the faculty in that program. And there is a free information session coming up on December 10th. We'll post that link in the chat for you to join that if you'd like to sign up for that, where you can ask more of these questions about, how it relates to the various things that we bring to the somatic field, whether you're a coach, yoga teacher, therapist, whatever it is. And so we hope you can join us for that. And also for anyone interested in working more with Dr. Arielle Schwartz, there's a level 2 of her applied polyvagal theory and therapeutic yoga for trauma recovery, which is starting December 2nd. And we will see you all soon. Thank you all. And we'll see you at the next session in just a few minutes. Take care.